The Craig Silverman Show welcomes you to Craig's Lawyers Lounge.
Well, this is a return visitor because he is smart. He is a member of the bar. He's involved in academia in the center of the storm at an Ivy League university. His name's William Jacobson. His award-winning blog, legalinsurrection.com. William Jacobson, welcome back to Craig's Lawyers Lounge. I have a team of paralegals standing by to bring you anything your heart may desire. What can they bring you?
A cup of coffee would be great.
Any sugar? Do you need cream?
No, just like straight up.
Straight up. Did you always drink your coffee straight up black? You know, I used to watch my mother do that, and I thought, how does she do that? At first I thought, how do you drink coffee? But then I never really liked cream, but I liked a lot of sugar. But now I'm down to such a minuscule amount of sugar that it's almost black. Were you always a black coffee drinker, or did you evolve the way I did?
Yeah, I think I evolved.
Right. Well, there's a movement called Black Coffee Matters. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's on all the Ivy League campuses. You were a prominent New York City lawyer. You made it big, but then you decided to go into academia. We covered that last time, but tell everybody what you do at Cornell University now.
Sure. I am a clinical professor of law. I run an investment law clinic that we have, and I teach investment law.
Did you have occasion to see my prior guest, Jesse Waters, report on your institution of higher learning when he went to Cornell?
Yes, I did. I wrote about that a couple of times. It got a lot of local attention about Jesse being essentially kicked off campus. And I wrote that it would create what's called the Streisand effect, which is that when Barbra Streisand tried to stop someone from photographing her mansion from an airplane, it just went wild on the internet and called 1,000,000 times more attention to it than if she had just let the guy take photos. And that's kind of what it was with Cornell, the Streisand effect, that if they had just let Jesse do his thing, it would have run on TV, everybody would have had a good laugh and enjoyed it, but it wouldn't have turned into a big controversy. But because they shut him down, it created much more attention than it would have received otherwise.
Jesse Waters reported that 96% of the faculty at Cornell are Democrats. Does that comport with your experience?
Yeah, the Cornell Sun, which is the student newspaper, actually did a really good study. They found that almost 97% of political donations in the 2012 and 2014 cycles from Cornell faculty went to Democrats. There were, I might be slightly off on the numbers, 323, I believe, total donations, of which only 15 were to Republicans, and, or 323 professors, I should say, who donated, and only 15 donated to Republicans. I was one of those 15. They noted that in the article. So I'm in a small minority on campus, but it's absolutely correct, I believe. It's an overwhelmingly liberal, progressive. A mainstream Democrat would probably be called a conservative on our campus. I think the report was absolutely true, and I think it's good that Jesse got some attention for it nationally.
It leads to comments like this. Here's a little soundbite from Jesse Waters' report on your institution of higher learning.
Do you think that the phrase Islamic terror is offensive?
Yes.
Have a lot of the terrorists been Episcopalian these days?
So there you go. I mean, it seems like the battle lines in America are drawn. Who's willing to say Islamic terrorism or radical Islam, and who's not willing? We know among the unwilling are Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Barack Obama. Where do you stand on that issue, and does it surprise you that most kids at Cornell would think, hey, that's offensive to call it Islamic terrorism?
Well, first of all, I don't know if most kids at Cornell or anywhere would consider it offensive. Whether they're willing to be on camera acknowledging it's accurate and not offensive is a different thing. I think you go up to any student on most campuses and they're going to be worried about how their peers view them, how their professors view them. So I don't know if that student, if that student was saying it because she believes it's offensive or because she knows it's the only acceptable answer on campus is to say that it's offensive. And I think that you're absolutely right. My position on it is we should describe things accurately. And as long as you are describing it accurately, whether it offends somebody or not is irrelevant. And in the current wave of terror, there is no question that it is, whether you want to call it radical Islam or Islamist terror or whatever it is, that's what it is. That's a fact. And that's not to say it's the only terror that takes place in the world, but that is the terror that's gripping Europe and is gripping the Middle East. I mean, there certainly have been terrorism against Muslims, for example, in parts of India and elsewhere, but that's not what we're talking about. And so my position is, as long as we are describing it accurately, we should describe it accurately. We should not use euphemisms, because if you can't acknowledge a problem, you can't take the first step towards solving it.
I have a two-part solution for this war that I think we're in. Do you believe we're at war right now, Professor Jacobson?
Yes, I think it's absolutely a form of war. It's not like the old times where, tanks were meeting each other on battlefields and hundreds of planes were flying overhead, but there's no question it's a war. It's a war being waged by radical Islam against the West and against moderate Muslims. I mean, let's face it, far more moderate Muslims, peaceful Muslims, have been killed by ISIS and by Al-Qaeda than Christians have been killed in Europe. And certainly there have been many Christian communities in the Middle East decimated as well. But I think it's absolutely a war, and to say it's not a war, but what does that mean? That doesn't necessarily mean that, we mobilize 100,000 troops. How you fight it is a different question, but first you have to acknowledge it is a war.
Right, and at your website right now, I'm looking at it, you have Bill Whittle talking about how liberalism has led to this, and I can't help but thinking about a guy in academia around here that I had the great honor of helping to expose. That was Ward Churchill. Listen to Ward Churchill and the memorable exchange he had with Megyn Kelly. And also there was our next guest, Dinesh D'Souza. But as a fellow academic, I want you to hear from Ward Churchill and his attitude toward America.
The United States of America, have we done any good? Boy, because you have a long list of the terrible things we've done. Can you think of anything good we did?
Not off the top, but I'm sure you'll fill in the blanks.
That's the problem with Professor Churchill, because people do not look at him as an honest broker. When you cannot offer one thing, maybe liberating Europe, maybe
that was the Soviet Union.
Maybe ending World War II. I mean, nothing. Maybe fighting a war to end slavery.
I think there were 27 million Soviets who died during that war that had a little more to liberating Europe, if that's what you want to talk about.
You're making my point, sir.
Right, but the Soviet Union was directly invaded, so they were merely protecting themselves and fighting the Nazis. They were perfectly happy to be allied with the Nazis before that, you remember?
I do remember.
As for the United States not only liberated Europe, but rebuilt Europe. And so former enemies, Germany and Japan, which were against us, are now friends. And
I'm familiar with the history.
So Dinesh D'Souza, I would prefer him as my kid's professor to Ward Churchill. But William Jacobson, first of all, here's your coffee. I hope it's good and hot. I know it's black. They didn't put anything in it. Let us know if you need more. But do you think Russia's going to have to do our fighting for us again?
Well, I don't know that Russia did our fighting for us in World War II. It was a joint effort.
Right.
We sent them a ton of equipment, et cetera. That's obvious. Those sort of analogies I don't think are quite right. The Russians, I just read a report, are basically bombing, civilian areas in the area controlled by ISIS. I don't know how many of the actual fighters they're going to kill. I saw one report that they're basically leveling the city of Raqqa, much like they leveled Grozny in Chechnya. So that's their way of fighting. I don't know if Russia's going to do our fighting for us. I don't know if they'll make the situation worse. They didn't have any more luck in Afghanistan than we had. I mean, obviously it was the Soviet Union back then. So I don't know if Russia's going to do the fighting for us, but I think that there needs to be some strategy that is going to deal with this. Of course, the problem is we have a president who refuses to acknowledge that he was part of the problem, that when George Bush left office, whether you liked the Iraq War or you hated it and you thought it was the worst thing in the world, the fact of the matter is when George Bush left office, Iraq was relatively stable. Al-Qaeda had been defeated. The Sunni tribes were on the government side. It was a relatively stable situation. Barack Obama decided that he had to walk away from it. He walked away from all the problems in the Middle East other than twisting Israel's arm, and he created this problem. If he had not divorced the U.S. from the Middle East, if he had been actively engaged, if he had helped the process, we probably would not be where we are today. I think it was yesterday, I heard a quote from him saying that all of this arises because of the mess that the Bush administration created in Iraq. And that is just a flat-out lie. All of this arises out of the dereliction of duty of our president, who politically, for his own ego, vowed to walk away from the Middle East and walked away. And that's the problem we have. So is Russia going to do our fighting for us or not? I don't know. But I don't know that we have a president who is emotionally capable because of how much political capital he's invested in walking away from the situation of dealing with it. So it may fall to the Russians by default.
Right. And I hate to see that because Putin's a bad guy. He kills his enemies. He suppresses free speech. And it's just sad that we would have to go that way. But what's going on with Barack Obama? I can't help but keep thinking about Ward Churchill and academia and thinking about Barack Obama at the University of Chicago where he did some teaching. And I'm worried that he's really radical, like his buddies Bill Ayers, Reverend Wright, Al Sharpton, maybe even Ward Churchill and, God forbid, Louis Farrakhan. Am I right to worry about these things, or am I overreacting?
Well, I don't know if all of them come into play, but there is no question when somebody not simply attends Jeremiah Wright's church, but makes that person his spiritual mentor, has that person marry him, there's something more there. I'm sorry. That's just the reality. I have not bought from day one that Barack Obama just spent 15 or 20 years in that church, never heard any of the things that his spiritual mentor said. I think that there is a part of Barack Obama which is very radical. He's not been willing to acknowledge it, but I think that it's there. And I think that we're seeing in his worldview a worldview where the U.S. is the problem, is the main problem in the world. And the way to solve that problem, therefore, if our involvement in the world is the problem, it's completely consistent with his foreign policy, which is to reduce our involvement in the world, as if that was somehow going to allow the really good people in the world to flourish once we got out of their way. And we've seen that that hasn't happened. So his actual foreign policy is consistent with the worldview you would have expected him to have when he made Jeremiah Wright his spiritual mentor.
Bill Jacobson, our special guest in Craig's Lawyers Lounge. He's a professor at Cornell University. Here's a recent statement by Barack Obama that raised a lot of eyebrows. I was acutely aware, and I admit that I voted for Barack Obama in 2008. I denied it if I could, but I did it live on C-SPAN that was covering us in a radio studio while I filled out my ballot then, because I thought Barack Hussein Obama would be the perfect guy to speak some basic truths to the Islamic world about what it would take to get along with the rest of the world in modern times. Instead, we get a statement such as this.
I think on the one hand, non-Muslims cannot stereotype, but I also think the Muslim community has to think about how we make sure that children are not being infected with this twisted notion that somehow they can kill innocent people.
So when he said we, what did you take out of that, Professor Jacobson? He seemed to emphasize that as if he is part of the Islamic world, which, I mean, he does have that lineage.
When I heard that, I didn't focus so much on the word we, so I'm not sure if I have a theory of that, but I do think that there's no question that his worldview is that the U.S. is the problem, and that's been a consistent theme from the day he got into office. And he went to Europe and he made an apology, and he went to Cairo and he made an apology. In his first year or two, there was almost no place he went that he didn't make an apology for the U.S. And so that's his philosophy. And people say, oh, he's, a secret radical or whatever. No, there's been nothing secret about Barack Obama. He told us what his policy was. He told it before he got elected. He told us in the first year or two. So there's nothing surprising in what has happened. The only thing that's surprising is that it took almost 7 years for the mainstream media to begin to realize that there's a problem here, because they were so infatuated with him, they refused to acknowledge any potential problems. So I didn't hear the word "we" in context, so I can't speak to it. But there's nothing surprising about what Barack Obama.
Well, let me play it just one more time and focus on the way he said "we." This is not a misstatement. This is a conscious effort. In fact, he highlights the word "we."
I think on the one hand, non-Muslims cannot stereotype, but I also think the Muslim community has to think about how we make sure that children are not being infected with this twisted notion that somehow they can kill innocent people.
So there it is.
Yeah, that does. I mean, the way he used it was placing himself in that category. Whether that was intentional, whether it was not intentional, I don't know the answer to that. But I think you correctly read his statement.
Right, and I can't help but think about Churchill, who in the wake of 9/11, while people were still dying in those buildings, sat down to pen an essay about chickens coming home to roost and how America, in effect, deserved what they got on 9/11. And I wonder how far that is from Barack Obama's worldview.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The most I know is what he said, and what he said is bad enough. He views us as the problem. We have a lot to apologize for, as if nobody else in the world needs to apologize to us for anything. And that's his worldview. He's never made it a secret. And whether he's got the same worldview as Bill Ayers or Ward Churchill or whoever, I don't know. But what he has acknowledged having, I think, is bad enough.
I have a 13-year-old, and he's doing pretty good in school, and he says, "Dad, I want to go to the Ivy League." And I'm looking at what's going on in the Ivy League. Barack Obama's a Harvard man. I see about this Black Lives Matter protest in the library at Dartmouth where Dinesh D'Souza went. I hear about the nonsense going on at your Ivy League institution, Cornell, and I'm thinking, wow, this is where it's coming from. You talk about the media covering Barack Obama the way they do. They're coming out of our institutions of higher learning. And will anything change until they start getting some more truth through the education system?
Well, the short answer is no, and here's a perfect example. Last night in Denver, the American Anthropological Association, at their annual business meeting for their annual meeting, voted to endorse the academic boycott of Israel. It now goes to the membership for a full vote. So it's not effective yet, but at the business meeting, these radical Israel haters who are obsessed voted by something like 88%, and this is only the people in attendance, so it's not the whole membership, to boycott Israel. Of all of the problems in the world, of all of the horrors that are going on, of what ISIS rampaging places, the knifing attacks on Jews in Israel, Hamas still occasionally shooting rockets at Israel and abusing their own people. Of all of those problems, the academics at the American Anthropological Association business meeting in Denver, Colorado, voted to boycott Israel.
Shocking.
How sick is that?
Right. I rode by that conference, and my Aunt Sidel is a member of that organization. I'm having lunch with her tomorrow. I'm confident she voted against it. She's a prominent anthropologist.
Only 138 people of 1,700 or 1,500 in attendance voted against it. Now, it does go to the full membership now, which is 10,000 people, and I'm hopeful a little bit of sanity will prevail, but there is a true fascism rising in academia, and its target is Israel, and I hope your listeners understand that. These are vicious, nasty people who have decided to take all their frustrations in the world out on the Jewish state. And when there's so many more worse problems, so much less academic freedom elsewhere in the world, they've singled out Israel. So if your question to me was, do we have to reform the education system because we're turning out people who are radicalized, the answer is absolutely. And it's the professors who are the single biggest problem.
Shocking. I'm glad you didn't order anything to eat because it might come up after that. I hope you enjoyed the coffee. I always enjoy your blog site. William Jacobson, I'm glad you're there in the Ivy League, but there are so few of you. Do what you can. Keep it up, and thanks for being in Craig's Lawyers Lounge again.